The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming territory, where gossip traveled faster than any telegraph wire ever could. It was the spring of 1876, and the small frontier town was about to witness something that would keep tongues wagging for years to come. In the Silver Dollar Saloon, a group of cowboys huddled around their whiskey glasses, their laughter echoing off the weathered wooden walls. Jake Morrison, the town's self-appointed newsbearer, slammed his glass down with theatrical flair. "You boys ain't gonna believe what I just heard," he announced, his weathered face creasing with amusement. "That wild man from the mountains, Elias Boone, the one they call Grizzly, he's gone and asked Clara Wade to marry him." The saloon erupted in disbelieving guffaws. Tom Henderson nearly choked on his drink. "Clara Wade? That spinster who looks like she got hit with the ugly stick and came back for seconds?" "The very same," Jake confirmed, relishing the attention. "Saw it with my own eyes. He walked right into her dress shop yesterday afternoon, stayed maybe 10 minutes, and came out with her saying yes." The laughter grew louder, drawing more patrons to their table. Even the bartender, old Samuel Green, shook his head in bewilderment as he wiped down glasses. "Well, I suppose even the homeliest mare needs a stable," drawled Bill Cooper, the townsbanker, who had wandered over from his corner table. "Though I can't imagine what that mountain man sees in her. Must have been alone up there so long that anything in a dress looks good." Outside the saloon, the news spread like wildfire through the wooden sidewalks and dirt streets. At Murphy's General Store, Mrs. Elizabeth Murphy held court with a circle of bonneted women, their faces a mixture of shock and barely concealed delight at having such juicy gossip to dissect. Poor Clara," Mrs. Murphy sighed dramatically, though her eyes sparkled with anything but sympathy. 32 years old and so desperate she'd accept a proposal from that savage. "He probably threatened her," suggested Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife. "You know how those mountain men are, more bear than human. Why, I heard he killed a grizzly with his bare hands. And lives in a cave," added young Mrs. Stanley, clutching her shopping basket tighter. "Eating raw meat and Lord knows what else." The women shuddered collectively, their imaginations running wild with tales of Elias Boone's supposed barbarism. None of them mentioned how he'd saved the Garrett family from freezing to death 2 winters ago, or how he'd tracked down the horse thieves who'd plagued the valley last summer. In Cedar Ridge, good deeds were quickly forgotten, but peculiarities were remembered forever. At the barber shop, the men were no kinder. Frank Phillips paused mid-shave to share his opinion with anyone who'd listen. "I've seen prettier faces on wanted posters," he declared. "That Clara Wade's so plain she'd have to sneak up on a glass of water to get a drink." The barber, Pete Crawford, chuckled as he worked. "Maybe Grizzly's eyesight's gone bad from all that snow glares up in them mountains. Only explanation I can figure." Even the children got in on the mockery. Outside the schoolhouse, young Tommy Morrison, Jake's boy, led a group in a cruel chant. Grizzly and Clara sitting in a tree, UGLY as can be. Their teacher, Miss Sarah Coleman, one of the few who didn't participate in the gossip, shooed them inside with a stern look. But even she couldn't help wondering what had possessed the mysterious mountain man to propose to Cedar Ridge's most overlooked woman. By noon, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard the news. The story grew with each telling. In some versions, Elias had been drunk. In others, it was a bet. The most creative suggested Clara had somehow bewitched him with herbs or potions, though everyone who knew Clara's gentle, unassuming nature found this particularly ridiculous. At the post office, Edgar Whitman sorted mail while regaling customers with his own theory. "Mark my words, he needs a woman to cook and clean for him up there. That's all this is, a business arrangement. Though why he'd pick Clara Wade when there's plenty of prettier gals who'd jump at the chance to marry any man with property." He trailed off as Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, fixed him with a disapproving stare. She was one of the few who'd noticed Clara's kindness over the years, how the seamstress often mended clothes for free for struggling families, or quietly left food baskets on doorsteps when times were hard. The afternoon brought no respite from the ridicule. At the blacksmith shop, the ring of hammer on anvil accompanied more jokes. "Maybe she looks better in the dark," suggested the blacksmith's apprentice, earning a round of harsh laughter from the men gathered there. "Or maybe," said Joe Turner, the livery stable owner, "Grizzly figures an ugly wife's better than no wife. Ain't like he's got much choice, living way up there like a hermit." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting Cedar Ridge in shades of gold and rust, the town's excitement showed no signs of waning. The upcoming wedding had given them something to talk about besides cattle prices and Indian troubles. It was entertainment, pure and simple, and they intended to squeeze every drop of amusement from it. In the hotel dining room, the evening crowd continued the day's sport. Judge Patterson held forth at the head table, his booming voice carrying across the room. "I'll perform the ceremony, of course. It's my duty. But I dare say it'll be the strangest wedding this town has ever seen. Beauty and the Beast, except we're not sure which is which." This brought another wave of laughter, forks clinking against plates as diners enjoyed their meals seasoned with mockery. The waitress, young Amy Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, moved between tables with downcast eyes, uncomfortable with the cruel talk, but powerless to stop it. As darkness fell and oil lamps were lit throughout the town, the saloons filled again. The Silver Dollar was packed, men 3 deep at the bar, all wanting to hear Jake Morrison retell the story of Grizzly's proposal. Each telling added new embellishments, new jokes, new reasons to laugh at the expense of 2 people who had never done them any harm. "To the happy couple," someone shouted, raising a glass in mock celebration. "May their children be blessed with his personality and her looks." The roar of laughter that followed could be heard clear across Main Street, where Sheriff Dan Coleman sat on the jailhouse porch, whittling and shaking his head. He'd seen plenty of ugliness in his years as a lawman, but sometimes the casual cruelty of ordinary folks struck him as worse than any outlaw's deed. As the night wore on and the whiskey flowed freely, the jokes grew cruder, the laughter meaner. It was as if the entire town had been given permission to voice every unkind thought they'd ever harbored about Clara Wade and Elias Boone. Their outsider status made them fair game, easy targets for a community that prided itself on conformity. By the time the saloons closed and the good citizens of Cedar Ridge stumbled home to their beds, the narrative was set. The mountain man and the ugly spinster. It was a joke that would sustain them through the coming days, something to chuckle about over breakfast and gossip about over fence posts. None of them suspected that they were about to witness something that would challenge every assumption they held, every prejudice they nursed. In their self-satisfied certainty, they couldn't imagine that perhaps, just perhaps, Elias Boone saw something in Clara Wade that their shallow eyes had missed entirely. The mountains stood silent and eternal against the star-filled sky, keeping their secrets. And somewhere among those peaks, a man who'd faced grizzlies and blizzards with equal calm, prepared for what might be his greatest adventure yet, marrying a woman the rest of the world had written off, but in whom he'd recognized a kindred spirit. Cedar Ridge slept, its dreams filled with anticipation of the spectacle to come. The wedding of the century, they were already calling it, though not for the reasons they supposed. Elias Boone stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the sun paint the valley below in shades of amber and crimson. At 6 feet 4 inches, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and hands scarred from countless battles with nature, he cut an imposing figure against the wilderness backdrop. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray from harsh winters, hung past his collar, and his beard, though neatly trimmed, couldn't hide the jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a grizzly encounter 10 years past. They called him Grizzly down in Cedar Ridge, though whether from that encounter or his resemblance to the beast, he neither knew nor cared. He'd earned the name fair and square, surviving what would have killed most men. The bear had charged him during a spring hunt, and with no time to reload his rifle, Elias had fought it with just his hunting knife and raw determination. He'd walked away with his life, the bear's pelt, and a reputation that kept most folks at arm's length. That suited him fine. After 15 years in these mountains, Elias had grown comfortable with solitude. He'd come west after the war, like so many men seeking to forget what they'd seen in those blood-soaked fields. The mountains didn't ask questions, didn't care about the nightmares that sometimes woke him, didn't judge the weight he carried in his soul. His cabin, built with his own hands from logs he'd felled and stones he'd hauled, sat sheltered in a grove of pines 2 hours' ride from town. It wasn't the cave people imagined, but a sturdy, well-crafted home with glass windows he'd packed in from Denver and a stone fireplace that could warm the place even in the fiercest blizzard. Inside, bearskins covered the floors and shelves held books, Thoreau, Emerson, even some Shakespeare. That would have surprised the gossipers in town. Elias had learned to read during the war, taught by a chaplain who'd seen something in the young soldier worth cultivating. Now, those long winter nights were filled with reading by lamplight, the words transporting him far from his mountain refuge. But lately, even books couldn't fill the growing emptiness he felt. He turned from the view and headed back to his cabin, his mind drifting to the woman who'd occupied his thoughts for months now, Clara Wade. The town called her ugly, plain, a spinster past her prime. Elias saw something else entirely. Down in Cedar Ridge, in a small room above her dress shop, Clara Wade sat by her window, needle moving steadily through fabric. At 32, she had long accepted her fate as the town's eternal spinster. Her mirror reflected what others saw: a thin face with prominent cheekbones, pale skin that freckled too easily in the sun, hair the color of dried grass that refused to hold a curl. Her eyes, a gray-green that changed with the light, were perhaps her best feature, but they were usually downcast, hidden behind wire-rimmed spectacles when she did her close work. She'd been pretty once, or at least she'd thought so. At 17, full of hope and dreams, she'd believed Samuel Henderson when he'd courted her with sweet words and promises. But when her father's business failed and her dowry disappeared, so had Samuel, marrying the banker's daughter within 3 months. The cruel words he'd spoken then, about her plainness, her unworthiness, had burrowed deep, changing how she saw herself. After her parents died in the influenza outbreak of 72, Clara had inherited the dress shop and the rooms above it. She'd poured herself into her work, her fingers creating beautiful gowns for other women to wear to dances she'd never attend. Her skill was undeniable. Even women who mocked her appearance grudgingly admitted that Clara Wade could work magic with fabric. But there was more to Clara than anyone in Cedar Ridge knew. In the evenings, after the shop closed, she studied the medical texts her mother had left behind. Margaret Wade had been a midwife and herbalist, teaching her daughter the healing arts in secret. A woman needs skills beyond sewing, she'd always said. Clara had delivered babies in the dead of night, set broken bones, and treated fevers, always quietly, always without seeking recognition. She also read voraciously, ordering books from Denver that she hid in her bedroom: philosophy, poetry, scientific journals. Her mind, sharp and curious, found solace in learning what her life couldn't provide in experience. Sometimes she wrote, filling journals with observations about life in Cedar Ridge, character sketches of its inhabitants that showed both their flaws and their hidden kindnesses. The knock on her shop door 3 days ago had changed everything. She'd looked up from hemming Mrs. Morrison's new Sunday dress to find Elias Boone filling her doorway. She'd seen him in town before, of course. Everyone noticed when Grizzly came down from his mountain. But he'd never spoken to her, and she'd certainly never expected him to enter her shop. "Miss Wade," he'd said, removing his hat. His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, rough from disuse, but not unkind. "I wonder if I might have a word." She'd stood, nearly knocking over her sewing basket in nervousness. Up close, he was even more imposing, but his eyes, brown as winter earth, held no threat. "Of course, Mr. Boone. How can I help you? Do you need mending done?" "No, ma'am." He'd shifted his weight, looking almost boyish despite his size and reputation. "I've come to ask you something. Been thinking on it for months now. Watching you when I come to town." Clara's heart had begun to race. Watching her? Why would anyone watch her? "I know I'm not much for words," he'd continued, "and I know what folks say about me, but I also know what I see. You're kind to people who don't deserve it. You help folks who can't pay. You've got learning. I've seen the books you order, and you don't gossip or judge like the rest of them." She'd stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "I'm asking if you'd consider marrying me," he'd said simply. "I can't offer you fancy things or an easy life, but I can offer you respect, a good home, and a man who'll see you for who you really are, not what others say you are." The shop had felt airless suddenly. Clara had gripped the counter for support. "Mr. Boone, why would you want to marry me? You could have any woman." "Don't want any woman," he'd interrupted gently. "I want one who knows what it's like to be on the outside looking in. One who's got strength that don't come from being praised and petted all her life. One who might understand a man who's more comfortable with wolves than tea parties." His words had hit her like physical blows, each one striking at the walls she'd built around her heart. "You don't know me," she'd whispered. "Know enough," he'd replied. "Know you stayed up 3 nights straight nursing the widow Patterson through pneumonia last winter, never taking credit. Know you leave food on old Charlie's doorstep when his rheumatism acts up. Know you've got more substance in your little finger than those painted peacocks have in their whole bodies." Tears had pricked her eyes then. When was the last time anyone had seen her, really seen her? "I'm not asking for an answer today," Elias had said, seeming to sense her overwhelm. "Think on it, but know this. I don't make offers lightly, and I mean what I say. You'd be respected in my home, Clara Wade. That's a promise." He'd left then, settling his hat back on his head and walking out as suddenly as he'd entered. Clara had sunk into her chair, mind reeling. For 3 days she'd thought of little else. The practical part of her listed all the reasons to say no. She barely knew him. Life in the mountains would be hard. The town would mock them mercilessly. But another part, a part she'd thought dead, whispered different truths. Here was a man who saw her worth, who offered not love. She was too old to believe in fairy tales, but something perhaps more valuable, respect and understanding. This morning, when he'd come for her answer, she'd surprised herself by saying yes. Now, as evening shadows lengthened across her small room, Clara folded the dress she'd been working on and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, the news would be all over town. She could already imagine the laughter, the jokes, the pitying looks. But for tonight, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. In his mountain cabin, Elias banked the fire and stepped outside for one last look at the stars. He'd taken plenty of risks in his life, faced down bears and blizzards and men intent on killing him. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something he couldn't quite name. He thought of Clara's eyes when she'd said yes, surprised, wary, but with a spark of something that might have been courage. The town could laugh all they wanted. They didn't know what he knew, hadn't seen what he'd seen. Sometimes the most precious things came in packages others overlooked. Any prospector worth his salt knew that, and Elias Boone had just staked his claim on the best treasure in Cedar Ridge. The bell above Clara's shop door chimed as Elias Boone ducked through the entrance, having to stoop slightly to clear the frame. It was mid-afternoon, and golden sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating motes of dust and the colorful bolts of fabric lining the walls. Clara looked up from her cutting table, scissors pausing mid-snip through a length of blue calico. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, setting down her tools. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her apron. "I didn't expect you back so soon." "Said I'd come for your answer," Elias replied, his hat already in his hands. He stood there, filling the small shop with his presence, yet somehow managing not to seem threatening. "Been 3 days. Figure that's time enough for thinking." Clara moved around the cutting table, her movements deliberate and careful, as if she were approaching a wild animal, which, she supposed, wasn't far from what the town believed about Elias Boone. But standing here in her shop, with afternoon light catching the silver threads in his dark hair, he looked more like a man carrying heavy burdens than a savage. "Before I give you my answer," she said, surprising herself with her steadiness, "I need to know something." "Why me?" "The truth, Mr. Boone. Not flattery or kindness, but the real reason." Elias studied her for a long moment, his brown eyes unreadable. Then he moved to the window, looking out at the street where 2 women quickly averted their gazes and hurried past, whispering behind their hands. "First time I saw you," he began, his voice low and measured, "was 2 winters back. That blizzard in January. I'd come down for supplies, got caught in town when it hit. watched from the hotel window as folks scrambled for shelter. Everyone running, shoving, thinking only of themselves. He turned back to her. Except you. You were out there helping old Martha Collins through the snow, practically carrying her. Your own coat wrapped around her shoulders while you shivered in just a shawl. Got her safe inside the church before you even thought of finding shelter yourself. Clara remembered that day. She'd nearly frozen, but Martha had survived. Started watching after that, Elias continued. Not in a way to make you uncomfortable, just noticing. Saw you sneak medicine to the Cherokee family camping outside town when their little one was sick. Saw you mending clothes by lamplight, not for pay, but for families too proud to ask for charity. Saw you stand up to Jake Morrison when he was rough with his horse, even though he towered over you and could have backhanded you easy as breathing. You saw all that? Clara whispered, heat rising in her cheeks. I see what matters, Elias said simply. Town sees surfaces. I've lived too long with mountains and storms to care about pretty faces. I need someone strong enough to survive when winter locks us in for weeks. Someone with healing hands when accident or illness strikes and we're 2 hours from any help. Someone who knows how to find joy in small things when life gets hard. He stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of pine and leather and something uniquely him. But more than that, I see a woman who's been alone as long as I have. Not by choice, maybe, but alone all the same. Figured maybe two people who know that particular kind of quiet might make something better together than apart. The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. When had anyone ever seen her so clearly? I need to know something too, she said. You say you need a woman who can heal, who can survive mountain winters. That sounds like you're hiring help, not taking a wife. Do you think I don't know the difference? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I've got 2 good hands. I can cook, clean, mend what needs mending. If all I wanted was a housekeeper, I'd hire one. What I'm offering is partnership. Equal say in decisions, your own space when you need it, respect for your learning and your skills, and maybe, given time. He paused, seeming to search for words. Maybe something more than partnership. Can't promise love. Don't know if I remember how, but I can promise to try. Clara walked to her chair and sat down heavily, her mind spinning. Everything he offered was more than she'd ever dared hope for. But still, the town will crucify us, she said quietly. They already laugh at me, add you to it, and we'll be the joke of the territory. Let them laugh. Elias's voice carried the firmness of mountain granite. Their opinions matter as much to me as a coyote's howl. Question is, do they matter to you? And there it was, the real question. Clara thought of 15 years of pitying looks, of whispered comments, of being invisible, except when she was the butt of jokes. She thought of nights crying into her pillow, of dreams that had withered like autumn leaves. Then she thought of this man who saw her worth, who offered respect and partnership, and the possibility of something more. They used to matter, she admitted. Maybe they still do a little, but she stood, squaring her shoulders. But I'm tired of living my life by their measure. Tired of being small and quiet and grateful for scraps of kindness. So? Elias prompted, and she could see tension in the set of his shoulders, as if her answer truly mattered to him. Clara took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a cliff. One step forward would change everything, but staying where she was, that was no longer an option. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, Mr. Boone, I'll marry you. Something shifted in Elias's face, relief perhaps, or satisfaction. He nodded once, firmly. Good. We'll do it proper. I'll speak to Judge Patterson today. Arrange things. 2 weeks give you enough time to settle your affairs? 2 weeks? Clara's head spun at the speed of it. No point in waiting, Elias said practically. Gives the town less time to try to talk you out of it, though they'll try anyway. As if to prove his point, the shop door burst open, bells jangling harshly. Mrs. Murphy stood there, face flushed with excitement and false concern. Clara, dear, I just heard the most ridiculous rumor. She stopped short, seeing Elias. Oh, Mr. Boone, I didn't realize. Ma'am, Elias said politely, though his eyes were cold as winter ice. Clara, Mrs. Murphy recovered. Might I have a word? Privately? Whatever you have to say can be said in front of Mr. Boone, Clara replied, finding strength in his solid presence. He's my intended, after all. Mrs. Murphy's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. So it's true? Oh, my dear, surely you haven't thought this through. A woman of your delicate sensibilities, and a man who lives like a wild animal. Careful, Elias said softly, but there was warning in it. Mrs. Murphy drew herself up. I'm only thinking of Clara's welfare. She has no idea what kind of life awaits her up in those mountains. The isolation, the danger, the complete absence of civilized company. You mean the absence of people who've spent 15 years treating her like she's invisible except when they need their dresses mended? Elias cut in. That kind of civilized company? The older woman flushed. Clara is a respected member of our community. Respected? Clara found her voice, years of suppressed anger suddenly bubbling up. When have any of you respected me, Mrs. Murphy? When you pay me half what my work is worth because you know I need the money? When you whisper behind your hands about the poor spinster when I walk by? When you only acknowledge me when you need something? Clara. Mrs. Murphy looked genuinely shocked. We've always been kind to you. Kind, Clara repeated bitterly. Yes, the kind of kindness you show a dog. Pat it on the head occasionally, throw it scraps, but never let it forget its place. Elias moved slightly, positioning himself beside Clara in subtle support. The gesture wasn't lost on Mrs. Murphy, whose eyes darted between them nervously. I came here out of Christian concern, the older woman said stiffly. But I see my worry is misplaced. You've clearly made your choice, Clara Wade. Don't come crying to us when you realize what a mistake you've made. She swept out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Clara sank into her chair, trembling with the aftershock of confrontation. That was just the beginning, Elias said quietly. They'll come at you harder over the next 2 weeks. Try to scare you, shame you, whatever it takes to keep things the way they are. Why do they care so much? Clara asked, genuinely puzzled. How does my marriage affect them? Because you're stepping out of the box they put you in, Elias explained. If plain Clara Wade can find a husband, can stand up to them, can choose her own path, what does that say about their neat little order of things? You're threatening their world just by not staying in your assigned place. Clara considered this, finding truth in his words. Were you assigned a place too? Mountain man, wild hermit, dangerous but useful when they need someone to track outlaws or hunt down predators. His smile was wry. We're both curiosities to them. Difference is, I never cared. You did. I'm learning not to, Clara said, and meant it. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. This is yours. Consider it a bride price, or just practical preparation. Should be enough to close out any debts. Stock up on supplies you'll need. Maybe get yourself some warmer clothes. Mountain nights are cold. Clara took the pouch, feeling the weight of gold coins inside. I can't. You can and you will, he interrupted. Pride's a luxury neither of us can afford. We're partners now, remember? What's mine is yours. The simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, nearly undid her. When had anyone ever shared with her so freely? I should warn you, she said, needing him to understand fully what he was getting. I have some peculiar ways. I read too much, according to the town. I keep journals. I know things about healing that some call unnatural, and I speak my mind sometimes when I shouldn't. Good, Elias said simply. Be a pleasant change from talking to myself. Anything else I should know? Clara hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. I'm a spinster in every sense of the word. I don't know how to be a wife. His expression softened slightly. And I don't know how to be a husband. Guess we'll figure it out together. He moved toward the door, then paused. 2 weeks, Clara. Don't let them talk you out of this. Whatever they say, whatever lies they tell about me or threats they make about you, remember, you said yes for a reason. Hold on to that. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the magnitude of what she'd just agreed to. Outside, she could already see curtains twitching, faces peering out. By evening, everyone would know. The storm was coming. But for the first time in 15 years, Clara Wade wasn't afraid of the weather. The parade of concerned visitors began the very next morning. Clara had barely opened her shop when Mrs. Patterson swept in. followed closely by Mrs. Stanley and Miss Prudence Hartwell, the schoolteacher's sister. They arranged themselves in her small sitting area like a tribunal, faces set in expressions of grave concern. "Clara, dear," Mrs. Patterson began, her minister's wife demeanor perfectly calibrated for delivering difficult truths. "We've come as your friends, your true friends, to help you see reason." Clara continued sorting through her thread spools, not trusting herself to look at them directly. "And what reason would that be, Mrs. Patterson?" "This absurd engagement, of course," Miss Hartwell burst out, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "That man is entirely unsuitable for any respectable woman, let alone someone of your delicate constitution." "My delicate constitution?" Clara asked mildly. "The same constitution that helped deliver your nephew last winter, Miss Hartwell? When the doctor couldn't make it through the snow?" The woman flushed but pressed on. "That's entirely different. Clara, you must understand. Elias Boone is not civilized. He lives like an animal up in those mountains. They say he eats raw meat and sleeps on the ground like a beast," Mrs. Stanley added breathlessly. "My husband heard from Jake Morrison that he's seen him running with wolves." Clara finally looked up, meeting their eyes steadily. "Has any of you actually spoken to Mr. Boone? Had a conversation with him beyond watching him from across the street?" The women exchanged glances. "Well, no," Mrs. Patterson admitted. "But one doesn't need to speak to a bear to know it's dangerous." "Mr. Boone is not a bear," Clara said firmly. "He's a man who chooses to live differently than you do. That doesn't make him an animal." "But what kind of life can he offer you?" Miss Hartwell leaned forward, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. "You have a respectable business here, a place in our community." "What place?" Clara interrupted, her patience finally fraying. "The place of the spinster seamstress you all pity? The woman you whisper about at church socials? The one you remember exists only when you need a dress altered?" Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. "We've always been kind to you, Clara Wade, included you in our charitable works." "As the one who does the mending while you take the credit," Clara shot back. "Yes, I've noticed how kind you've been." The door chimed again, and this time it was Dr. William Garrett who entered, looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind him came Judge Patterson himself, clearly recruited for his authority. "Ladies, if you'll excuse us," the judge said smoothly. "I need to speak with Miss Wade about the legal ramifications of her decision." The women reluctantly filed out, but not before Mrs. Stanley whispered loudly, "We tried, dear. Remember that when you're trapped up there with that brute?" Once they were gone, Judge Patterson settled his considerable bulk into a chair, while Dr. Garrett remained standing, fidgeting with his medical bag. "Clara," the judge began, "I've come to explain certain legal realities. Once you marry, everything you own becomes your husband's property. This shop, your savings, even the clothes on your back. You'll have no recourse if he proves difficult." "I understand the law, Judge Patterson," Clara replied coolly. "I also understand that Mr. Boone has already provided me with funds to settle my affairs properly, which is more than my father did for my mother." The judge's eyebrows rose. "He gave you money before the wedding? Is that so strange, that a man might trust his intended?" Dr. Garrett cleared his throat. "Clara, there's another matter. Your health. A woman of your age, unused to, that is, the physical demands of marriage." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I've delivered 7 babies, doctor. I think I understand the physical realities of marriage. But you've never—" He stopped, clearly flustered. "What I mean is, a man like Boone, accustomed to rough living, might not be gentle." "Enough!" Clara stood, her small frame rigid with anger. "How dare you come into my shop and speak to me this way? Would you say such things to Mrs. Morrison when she married her 3rd husband? Or to young Jenny Carter when she wed that traveling salesman nobody knew anything about?" "Those were different situations," Judge Patterson said stiffly. "Yes, they were pretty and young and therefore deserving of happiness," Clara said bitterly. "While I should be grateful to spend my remaining years as your wife's unpaid seamstress." The door burst open again, bells jangling violently. This time it was Elias himself, his large frame filling the doorway. His eyes took in the scene. Clara standing defiant, the two men looking guilty, and his jaw tightened. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Something I can help you with?" Judge Patterson stood hastily. "Mr. Boone, we were just—" "Harassing my intended." Elias stepped fully into the shop, and both men instinctively backed away. "Because that's what it looks like from where I'm standing. We were concerned for Clara's welfare, Dr. Garrett said, trying to sound professional but achieving only nervous. "Were you—" Elias moved to stand beside Clara, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Funny how that concern only showed up when she agreed to marry me. Where was it the past 15 years while she struggled alone?" "Now see here," Judge Patterson began. "No, you see here," Elias cut him off. "Clara Wade is under my protection now. Any man who disrespects her disrespects me, and I think you both know how I handle disrespect. The threat wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. Both men had heard the stories, Elias tracking down the men who'd stolen from him, leaving them tied to trees for the sheriff to find. His fight with Big Tom Hawkins when the man had insulted an Indian woman. His reputation for never forgetting a slight. "We meant no harm," Dr. Garrett said quickly. "We were just concerned." "Your concern is noted and rejected," Clara said, finding courage in Elias's presence. "Now, unless you have business that requires my services, I'll ask you to leave." They left quickly, the judge muttering about legal documents and the doctor about house calls. When they were gone, Clara sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "They'll get worse," Elias warned. "This was just the opening salvo." "I know." Clara looked up at him. "Why did you come? Not that I'm ungrateful, but saw them heading this way. Figured you might need backup." He studied her face. "You held your own, though. Did good." The simple praise warmed her more than flowery compliments ever could have. "I'm not used to standing up to them. Gets easier with practice." He moved to the window, watching the street. "Though I could make it stop. One word from me and they'd leave you alone until the wedding." Clara considered this. It would be easier letting him fight her battles, but no, I need to do this myself. I've been invisible so long I almost forgot I had a voice. I need to remember how to use it. Elias nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit I saw in you. Just remember, you don't have to fight alone anymore." He was about to leave when the door opened once more. This time it was young Amy Chen, looking nervous but determined. "Miss Clara, Mama sent me with this." She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "She says to tell you congratulations, and that true friends see with the heart, not the eyes." Clara's eyes misted as she took the package. Inside was a beautiful silk handkerchief embroidered with mountain wildflowers. "Tell your mother thank you," she managed. Tell her it means everything." Amy smiled shyly, nodded to Elias, and scurried out. "See?" Elias said quietly. "Not everyone in this town is blind." Over the next week, the campaign intensified. Women came in groups, trying to wear her down with dire predictions. Men stopped by to warn her about the dangers of mountain living. Even Reverend Patterson himself made an appearance, speaking gravely about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of choosing wisely. But Clara had found her backbone. To each visitor, she presented a calm face and firm resolve. When Mrs. Morrison suggested Elias might beat her, Clara asked sweetly if that was Mr. Morrison's approach, given the bruises she'd noticed on the woman's arms. When Tom Henderson warned that Elias might abandon her in the mountains, she inquired whether that was worse than being abandoned in plain sight, as she had been for 15 years. The turning point came when Samuel Henderson himself appeared. Clara hadn't seen her former beau in years. He usually sent his wife for any sewing needs. Now he stood in her shop, still handsome in a soft, pampered way, trying to look noble. "Clara," he said, as if they were old friends, "I feel responsible for your situation." "Oh?" She didn't look up from her sewing. If things had been different between us, you wouldn't be driven to this desperate choice." Now she did look up, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The weak chin, the shifty eyes, the soft hands that had never known real work. "You're right," she said calmly. If you hadn't shown me exactly how worthless your promises were, I might have spent my life waiting for another man just like you. Instead, I'm marrying someone who sees my value, not my dowry. So thank you, Samuel. You did me the greatest favor of my life." He left red-faced and stammering, and Clara realized with wonder that she meant every word. The pain he'd caused had shaped her, yes, but it had also taught her to recognize real worth when she saw it. That evening, as she was closing up shop, Elias appeared with a bundle. "Brought you something," he said gruffly, handing it over. Inside were fur-lined gloves, a heavy wool cloak, and sturdy boots, all practical, all necessary for mountain life, but all of finest quality. "They're perfect," she said softly. "Good." He shifted uncomfortably. "How are you holding up? With all the visiting committees?" "Better than expected." She smiled slightly. "I'm discovering I have claws after all." "Never doubted it." He paused at the door. 4 more days, Clara, then we can leave all this behind." "I'm counting the hours," she admitted, and was surprised to find it was true. As he left, Clara fingered the soft fur of the gloves and thought about transformation. The town saw her upcoming marriage as a tragedy, the final chapter in the sad story of plain Clara Wade. But she was beginning to suspect it might be something else entirely. The first chapter of a story she was finally brave enough to write herself. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with frost painting delicate patterns on Clara's bedroom window. She'd been awake since before dawn, not from nerves, but from a strange sense of anticipation. Today, her life would change irrevocably. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly calm. She dressed carefully in the dark blue dress she'd sewn herself, not a traditional wedding gown, but something that suited her. The fabric was good quality wool, practical for her new life, but she'd allowed herself small touches of beauty, mother-of-pearl buttons, delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her mother's cameo brooch rested at her throat. As she pinned up her hair, Clara studied her reflection. The same plain face looked back, but something had changed in the past 2 weeks. Her chin lifted higher, her eyes held a spark that hadn't been there before. She wasn't beautiful, would never be beautiful, but perhaps she was something better. Perhaps she was herself. The church bells began ringing at 10 o'clock, and Clara could hear the unusual bustle in the street below. It seemed half the territory had come to witness the spectacle of Grizzly Boone marrying plain Clara Wade. She took a deep breath, gathered her small bouquet of dried wildflowers. Elias had brought them yesterday, gathered from his mountain meadow, and descended the stairs. Amy Chen waited at the bottom, her mother beside her. Mrs. Chen pressed Clara's hand warmly. "You look lovely, Miss Clara, like woman who knows her worth." "Thank you," Clara whispered, throat tight with emotion. The walk to the church felt both endless and far too short. People lined the streets, openly staring, whispering behind hands and fans. Clara heard snatches of commentary. "Look at her, trying to pretty herself up. That dress won't make a difference. Poor thing, she has no idea what she's in for. Betty doesn't even show up." But Clara kept walking, head high, eyes forward. Let them talk. After today, their opinions would be as distant as their faces. The church doors loomed before her. Inside, she could hear the crowd's excited murmur, like buzzards gathering for a feast. Clara paused, hand on the door handle, and took one last breath as Cedar Ridge's spinster seamstress. Then she pushed open the doors. The church was packed, every pew filled, people standing along the walls, children perched on shoulders for a better view. The whispers rose to a crescendo as Clara appeared, then suddenly died, because there, at the altar, stood Elias Boone, but not the Elias Boone they knew. Gone were the rough leather clothes, the wild hair, the mountain man appearance that had earned him his nickname. In his place stood a man transformed. He wore a black suit, clearly new, that had been tailored to fit his powerful frame perfectly. His hair was neatly trimmed, his beard shaped and groomed. His boots shone with polish. A silver watch chain glinted across his vest. He looked not like a savage from the mountains, but like a successful rancher or businessman, respectable, dignified, commanding. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Women who'd called him a beast now stared with something approaching appreciation. Men who'd mocked him from the safety of their whiskey glasses now straightened unconsciously, recognizing the presence of someone to be reckoned with. But Elias had eyes only for Clara. As she walked down the aisle, she saw his expression, steady, sure, with a warmth that made her forget the hundreds of watching eyes. When she reached him, he offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. "You came," she whispered. "Said I would," he replied simply. Then, lower, just for her, "You look beautiful." She knew he meant it, and that was all that mattered. Judge Patterson cleared his throat, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his ministerial role. His son, the regular minister, had conveniently been called away, leaving the judge to perform the ceremony. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice lacking its usual pompous authority, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Elias Boone and Clara Wade." The ceremony proceeded with painful slowness. Judge Patterson seemed to be drawing it out, perhaps hoping someone would object, would stop this upheaval of the social order. But the crowd remained silent, mesmerized by the transformation before them. When it came time for the vows, Elias spoke clearly, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the church. "I, Elias, take you, Clara, to be my wife. I promise to respect you, protect you, and value you for who you are, not who others think you should be. I promise to share my life with you honestly, to support your dreams as my own, and to face whatever comes with you beside me." They weren't the traditional vows, but they were real, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes as she spoke her own. "I, Clara, take you, Elias, to be my husband. I promise to stand with you against all storms, to bring healing where there's hurt, to create a home with you built on trust and understanding. I promise to be your partner in all things, and to never let fear make me small again." Judge Patterson looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he continued. "The rings." Elias produced 2 simple gold bands. As he slipped hers on, Clara noticed an inscription inside. "Strength in truth. By the power vested in me," Judge Patterson said reluctantly, "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." This was the moment the crowd had been waiting for. Surely the rough mountain man would grab her, maul her, prove their worst expectations right. Instead, Elias cupped Clara's face gently in his hands, his touch infinitely careful, and kissed her softly, briefly, with a tenderness that spoke of promises and respect and something that might, given time, grow into love. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the silence was deafening. Then, from the back of the church, came the sound of slow clapping. Mrs. Chen stood, applauding deliberately, her daughter joining her. Then old Charlie, whom Clara had fed so many times, struggled to his feet, clapping with gnarled hands. The widow Patterson, whom Clara had nursed through pneumonia, added her applause. One by one, others joined. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to show that some people had seen, had remembered, had noticed the quiet kindness of the woman they'd overlooked for so long. As Clara and Elias walked back down the aisle, she held her head high, meeting the eyes of those who'd tormented her. Mrs. Murphy looked stunned. Mrs. Stanley seemed to be reconsidering everything she thought she knew. Samuel Henderson wouldn't meet her gaze at all. Outside the church, in the crisp autumn air, Clara felt as if she could breathe for the first time in years. Elias helped her into the wagon he'd brought, loaded with her possessions and the supplies they'd need. "Wait!" someone called. It was Miss Sarah Coleman, the schoolteacher, running despite her proper skirts. "Clara, I wanted to say I'm sorry, for never speaking up, for letting them—" She trailed off, then pressed a small package into Clara's hands. "For your new home, and thank you for everything you've done that went unthanked." Others approached then, people Clara had helped over the years, quietly, without recognition. The Cherokee family she'd given medicine to, the young mother whose baby she'd delivered, the old miner whose infected wounds she'd treated, and each offered small gifts, quiet thanks, acknowledgement that came too late, but was precious nonetheless. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Elias helped Clara onto the wagon seat. The crowd had reformed, watching this final act of the drama they'd come to witness. "Ready?" Elias asked quietly. Clara looked back at Cedar Ridge, At the shop where she'd spent so many lonely years. At the people who defined her by their narrow vision. At the life she was leaving behind. Then she looked at the man beside her. At the mountains rising in the distance. At the unknown future waiting. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. As they drove out of town, Clara heard the buzz of conversation resume behind them. She knew the story would be told and retold, embellished and altered. The wedding of the century, they'd call it, though not for the reasons they'd expected. "You did well back there," Elias said as the town faded behind them. "So did you." She glanced at his transformed appearance. "The suit was a surprise. Wanted them to see you weren't marrying some wild man. Wanted them to know I could be civilized when it mattered." He tugged at the collar uncomfortably. "Though I'll be glad to get back to my regular clothes." Clara laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprising them both. "I think you've given them enough to talk about for years." "Good. Maybe they'll be too busy gossiping to bother us." As the wagon climbed toward the mountains, Clara felt the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. Behind them lay judgment and mockery and small-minded cruelty. Ahead lay challenges, certainly, but also possibility. She was no longer plain Clara Wade, the spinster seamstress. She was Clara Boone, wife of a man who saw her truth, heading toward a life she'd chosen for herself. And despite what the town might whisper in the coming days, that made her the richest woman in the territory. The journey to Elias's mountain home took nearly 3 hours, the wagon climbing steadily through pine forests and along narrow trails that made Clara grip the seat. As they ascended, the air grew thinner and cleaner, scented with evergreen and the promise of snow. Neither spoke much during the ride, both aware that everything between them would be different once they reached their destination. When they finally emerged into a clearing, Clara caught her breath. The cabin wasn't the crude shack she'd half expected despite Elias's descriptions. Built of solid logs with a stone chimney sending up a welcoming spiral of smoke, it nestled against a backdrop of towering peaks. Glass windows caught the late afternoon sun, and a covered porch ran along the front. To one side stood a well-built barn and corral, to the other a small garden plot waiting for spring. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's home," Elias replied, but she caught the pleased note in his voice. "Our home now." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the golden light of approaching evening, away from the town's prying eyes, Clara felt the first flutter of nervousness. They were truly alone now. Husband and wife, in fact, as well as law. Inside, the cabin was even more surprising. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Handmade furniture showed skill and care in its construction. Shelves held not just the expected supplies, but books, dozens of them. A bearskin rug covered the plank floor, and oil lamps waited to push back the mountain darkness. "There's a bedroom through there," Elias said, gesturing to a door, "and a small room I use for storage, but it could be, that is, if you need your own space." "Thank you," Clara said, understanding his delicate offer. Despite their marriage, he was giving her the option of privacy until she was ready for more. They spent the early evening hours establishing a tentative domestic rhythm. Elias brought in her belongings while Clara explored the kitchen, finding it well stocked and organized. She prepared a simple meal, venison stew from meat he'd already had soaking, fresh bread she'd brought from town, preserved vegetables from his root cellar. As they ate by lamplight, the intimacy of the situation settled around them like a blanket. In town, there had always been the buffer of other people, of social conventions. Here, there was just the two of them, the crackling fire and the vast silence of the mountains. "I should tell you," Elias said suddenly, setting down his spoon. "I've never done this before. Been married, lived with someone. I don't know the rules, the expectations." "Neither do I," Clara admitted. "I suppose we make our own rules." He nodded slowly. "I meant what I said in town, about respect, about taking time. I know the law says you're my property now, but I don't hold with that. You're my partner, not my possession." Clara felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "And I meant what I said about not letting fear make me small. But I am nervous. This is all so new. We don't have to figure it all out tonight." Elias said gently. We have time. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the awkwardness gradually easing as they talked. Elias told her about the cabin, how he'd built it over 2 years, choosing each log carefully, chinked the gaps with his own hands. Clara shared her plans for the garden, the herbs she wanted to grow for healing. When full darkness fell and the fire burned low, Elias stood. I'll bank the fire. The bedroom's yours tonight. I'll take the storage room. There's a cot in there I use sometimes. Elias, Clara said softly, standing as well. This is your bed, your home. I won't drive you out of it on our wedding night. He went very still. Clara, I don't expect... I know. She took a breath, gathering courage. But we're married. And while I'm not ready for everything, I think we could share the space, learn to be comfortable with each other. In the dim light, she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. If you're sure. The bedroom was simple but clean, with a large bed covered in quilts, a washstand, and hooks for clothing. Clara retreated behind a screen to change into her nightgown, her hands trembling slightly as she unpinned her hair. When she emerged, Elias had his back turned, giving her privacy to slip under the covers. He blew out the lamp before joining her, the bed dipping under his weight. They lay side by side in the darkness, carefully not touching, the space between them feeling both vast and impossibly small. Clara, Elias said quietly into the darkness, can I tell you something? Yes. You're not what they said you were. Not plain, not ugly. When I look at you, I see strength, intelligence, kindness that runs bone deep. That's beautiful to me. Clara turned toward him, though she could barely make out his silhouette in the darkness. How long were you watching me before you proposed? 2 years, give or take. Started as curiosity, wondering about the woman who helped others but always stood alone. Became something more. Admiration. Respect. And then I realized I was looking forward to my town visits, not for supplies, but for the chance I might see you. Realized I was storing up things to tell you, even though we'd never spoken. That's when I knew. Knew what? That I was lonely, in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. That I wanted a partner, a companion. Someone to share the silence with who'd understand that sometimes silence is better than words. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I was lonely too, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. They looked right through me, like I was made of glass. Not glass, Elias said firmly. Steel, just hadn't been tested yet. They lay quietly for a while, the darkness making honesty easier. In town, Clara said eventually. In the lamplight, at the shop. You told me I looked beautiful. Did you mean it? She felt him shift beside her. May I? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face gently. His fingers traced her cheekbone, her jaw, learning her by touch. Yes, not in the way town understands beauty. Something deeper, like looking at a mountain and seeing not just rock but strength that endures, beauty that doesn't need prettiness. His hand moved to her hair, running through the long strands spread across the pillow. Your hair catches light like wheat in sunshine. Your eyes change color with your moods. Green when you're angry, gray when you're thinking. You have a way of tilting your head when you're really listening that makes a person feel heard. That's beautiful. Clara caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. No one's ever seen me the way you do. Their loss, he said simply. My gain. She turned her face to press a kiss to his palm, felt him go still. Elias. Yes, I'm glad it's you. Glad I said yes. Glad I'm here. He pulled her gently against him then, her head fitting naturally into the curve of his shoulder. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, could smell the clean scent of soap and pine that clung to him. There's something else, he said, his voice rumbling through his chest. Something I didn't tell you about why I chose you. Clara waited, feeling safe in the circle of his arms. That day in the blizzard? When you helped Martha Collins. I wasn't watching from the hotel. I was out in it, trying to get supplies secured. I saw you take off your coat, saw you struggling through the snow, started to come help, but then I saw your face. You weren't suffering, weren't martyring yourself. You were fierce, determined. happy almost to be fighting for something that mattered. His arms tightened around her. That's when I knew you could survive up here. Not just survive, thrive, because you understand that sometimes the struggle is what makes us feel alive. Clara lifted her head to look at him, seeing only the gleam of his eyes in the darkness. The town would be scandalized, seeing us like this, the ugly spinster and the wild mountain man. Let them be scandalized, Elias murmured. We know the truth. What truth is that? That you were never ugly, just hidden, and I was never wild, just waiting. Waiting for what? For you. The simple words, spoken with such certainty, broke something open in Clara. She reached up, finding his face in the darkness, and brought his lips down to hers. This kiss was different from the careful one at the altar. Deeper, exploring, a promise and a question all at once. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Clara, Elias said roughly, we don't have to. I know, she interrupted. And we won't, not tonight. But I wanted you to know, I want this marriage, all of it, when I'm ready. There's no rush, he assured her. We have all the time in the world. They settled back into each other's arms, the strangeness of sharing a bed already fading into something that felt almost natural. Outside, wind sang through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not threatening, but wild and free. Tomorrow, Elias said sleepily. I'll show you everything. The spring where we get our water, the best places to find herbs, the cave where I store extra supplies. Start teaching you what you need to know. And I'll make this place more of a home, Clara promised. Curtains for the windows, maybe some cushions for those chairs. Nothing fancy, just touches of you, he finished. Good. It needs that. As sleep began to claim them, Clara marveled at the turn her life had taken. This morning she'd woken as a spinster in a small room above a shop. Tonight she lay in the arms of a man who saw her truly, in a cabin on a mountain, with a future spread before them as vast as the sky. The town had been wrong about so many things, but most of all about this. There was nothing ugly about Clara Boone, and nothing savage about the man who held her like she was precious beyond measure. In the darkness of their wedding night, with desire banked like coals waiting to be stirred to flame when the time was right, they began the slow, sweet process of building a marriage based on truth, respect, and the growing certainty that they had each found their match in the most unexpected place. The last thing Clara thought before sleep took her was that the town would be shocked if they could see her now. But then again, the town had never really seen her at all. Only Elias had, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. The first test of Clara's mountain mettle came just 3 weeks after the wedding. Elias had gone hunting, expecting to be back by nightfall, when the temperature dropped suddenly and snow began falling in thick, heavy sheets. Clara watched from the window as the world turned white, trying not to worry as darkness fell with no sign of her husband. By midnight, with the snow still falling and the wind howling like a living thing, she made her decision. Bundling herself in the warm clothes Elias had bought her, she lit a lantern and ventured out to the barn. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, but she pushed forward. If Elias was caught in this storm, he'd need help. She saddled the gentlest horse, a mare named Buttercup, with hands that shook only slightly. Elias had taught her the basics of riding in their first weeks together, though he'd never imagined she'd need the skill so soon. Tying a rope between the barn and the cabin porch, a trick he'd shown her for navigating in whiteout conditions, she set out into the storm. The wind tried to tear her from the saddle. Snow blinded her, but Clara pressed on, following the trail Elias had taken that morning. Her medical training kicked in as she considered the dangers: hypothermia, frostbite, disorientation. She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on moving forward, calling Elias's name into the wind. She found him 2 miles from home, his horse down with a broken leg. Elias himself half buried in snow where he'd taken shelter against a rock face. His lips were blue, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. "Fool woman," he mumbled as she knelt beside him. "Should have stayed inside." "Hush," Clara said firmly, her hands already checking for injuries. His ankle was twisted, possibly broken, and his body temperature dangerously low. "Can you ride?" Working with efficiency born of necessity, She got him onto Buttercup, wrapping her own coat around him despite his protests. The journey back was a nightmare of wind and snow, and Elias's increasingly incoherent mumbling, but Clara's determination never wavered. She'd lost too much in her life to lose him now. Back at the cabin, she worked through the night. She splinted his ankle, warmed him gradually by the fire, forced hot broth between his lips when he regained consciousness. Her mother's teachings flowed through her hands. Which herbs to steep for warming tea, how to check for frostbite, the signs of dangerous cold exposure. By dawn, the storm had passed and Elias was sleeping normally. His color returned. Clara sat beside the bed, exhausted but victorious. When he woke, his eyes were clear and focused on her face. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You would have done the same for me. That's not the point." He caught her hand, studying her with something like awe. "The town said you were weak, delicate, but you rode out into a killing storm and brought me home." "I'm stronger than I look," Clara said with a small smile. "No," Elias corrected. "You're exactly as strong as you look. I've always seen it. Now you see it too." Word of Clara's rescue somehow reached town, perhaps through the trapper who stopped by a week later for supplies. The story grew in the telling, as stories do, until Clara had fought off wolves and carried Elias 10 miles through the snow. But at its heart, the truth remained. The delicate spinster had saved the mountain man's life. The second test came a month later, this time in the form of danger rather than nature. Clara was alone, Elias having gone to town for supplies, when she heard horses approaching. 3 men rode into the clearing, rough-looking sorts with hard eyes and harder smiles. "Well, well," the leaders said, dismounting without invitation. "Heard Grizzly got himself a woman. Didn't believe it, but here you are." Clara stood on the porch, rifle in hand as Elias had taught her. "Gentlemen, my husband isn't home, but I'll be happy to offer you water for your horses before you move on." They laughed, an ugly sound. "Hospitable, I like that. Thing is, we've got business with your husband. He interfered with our enterprise last year. Cost us significant money." Clara remembered Elias mentioning running off claim jumpers who'd been terrorizing legitimate miners. These must be them. "Then you'll need to take that up with him when he returns," she said calmly, though her heart raced. "Which should be soon." "Soon. Or," the second man suggested, moving closer, "we could leave him a message. Nothing permanent, just something to remember us by." Clara raised the rifle. "That would be unwise." They laughed again. "Lady, do you even know how to use that thing?" In response, Clara shot the hat off the leader's head, the sound echoing across the clearing. Before they could recover from their shock, she'd already levered another round into the chamber. "The next one won't be aimed so high," she said coolly. "My husband taught me well, and I've been practicing on rabbits, much smaller targets than you gentlemen." But they weren't done. The third man, who'd been silent until now, suddenly rushed the porch. Clara swung the rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw, then dove inside and barred the door. They could hear them circling the cabin, looking for another way in. Clara's mind raced. Elias had shown her the cabin's defenses, windows that could be shuttered and barred, the second rifle hidden by the back door, the signal fire ready to light on the roof. But 3 men, determined and angry. Then she remembered something else, something from her mother's teachings about plants that could incapacitate without killing. Moving quickly, she grabbed her medicine bag and mixed a powder into a pot of coffee, then unbarred the door. "Gentlemen," she called out sweetly, "I apologize for my rudeness. Please come in and warm yourselves. We can discuss this like civilized people." Suspicious but cold, they entered. Clara served them coffee with steady hands, chattering nervously like the weak woman they expected her to be. Within 10 minutes, all 3 were violently ill, rushing outside to empty their stomachs. By the time they recovered enough to be angry, Clara had their guns and horses secured in the barn. She stood on the porch again, rifle ready. "The effects will pass in a few hours," she informed them. "But I suggest you start walking now. It's a long way to town, and my husband will be back soon. He's not as forgiving as I am." They stumbled off, supporting each other, casting murderous looks back but too sick and disarmed to do anything about it. Clara watched until they were out of sight, then finally allowed herself to shake. When Elias returned that evening, he found their horses in the barn and Clara calmly cooking dinner. She told him the story matter-of-factly, as if drugging and disarming 3 outlaws was an everyday occurrence. Elias listened in growing amazement, then pulled her into his arms. "You wonderful, terrifying woman," he murmured against her hair. "Remind me never to make you angry." "They'll be back," Clara warned. "No, they won't." His voice was grim. "I'll track them tomorrow, make sure they understand that threatening my wife carries consequences. But Clara, you handled them. Alone. Do you understand how remarkable that is?" She pulled back to look at him. "I did what needed doing. Isn't that what we do up here? What needs doing?" "Yes," he said, kissing her soundly. "That's exactly what we do." The story spread this time too, enhanced and embellished until Clara had taken on 12 men with her bare hands. The truth was impressive enough. She'd outthought and outmaneuvered 3 dangerous men without firing a lethal shot. Winter settled over the mountains in earnest, and Clara proved her worth again and again. When a trapper arrived half dead from infection, she operated on his leg by lamplight, saving both the limb and his life. When supplies ran low during a 3-week blizzard, she showed creativity in stretching what they had, making meals from things Elias hadn't even considered edible. But perhaps the most telling moment came on a quiet evening in December. They were reading by the fire, Elias with a book on agriculture, Clara with a medical journal, when they heard a faint scratching at the door. Elias opened it to find a wolf pup, half-starved and nearly frozen. "Poor thing," Clara said immediately, scooping it up despite Elias's warning about wild animals. "Look, it's been abandoned, maybe orphaned." "Clara, wolves aren't pets." But she was already warming the pup by the fire, trickling water between its jaws. "I know, but I won't let it die for being born a wolf. We'll nurse it back to health and release it come spring." Elias watched his wife tend the wild creature with the same gentle efficiency she'd shown with him, and felt his heart constrict with an emotion he was only beginning to name. The pup survived, following Clara around the cabin like a dog, sleeping at her feet. Even when it grew stronger, it showed no fear of her, as if recognizing a kindred spirit, something wild that had learned to survive in civilization's clothing. By the time spring's first thaw came, the transformation was complete. Not of Clara. She'd always been strong, resourceful, capable, but of how she saw herself, how she moved through the world. The woman who'd once crept through town trying to be invisible now strode with confidence. The hands that had sewn in silence now healed and helped and held a rifle with equal skill. One morning, as they released the wolf, now grown healthy and strong, back into the wild, Elias said what he'd been thinking for months. "You know, the town had it all wrong. You're the beautiful one. I'm the beast you transformed with your courage." Clara laughed, the sound echoing off the mountains. "We transformed each other. That's what partners do." As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Clara thought about the journey from that shop above Main Street to this mountain home. The town would never understand what had happened here, would never grasp how the ugly spinster had become this woman who could face down storms and outlaws with equal determination. But that was all right. She had everything she needed: a home, a purpose, and a man who'd seen her truth from the beginning. The rest of the world could keep their narrow definitions of beauty and worth. Up here in the mountains, Clara Boone had found something far more valuable: herself. It was spring again in Cedar Ridge, a full year since the wedding that had set tongues wagging from here to Denver. The town prepared for its annual Founders' Day celebration, and for the first time in memory, Elias and Clara Boone had agreed to attend. The news spread like wildfire. Would Clara still be the same plain creature they remembered? Had mountain life broken her, as they'd predicted? Some swore she must be pregnant by now. Why else would they venture down from their hermitage? But when the wagon rolled into town that Saturday morning, the crowd that gathered fell into stunned silence. Elias looked much as he always had: powerful, composed, wearing his good suit with the same easy grace he'd shown at their wedding. But Clara was transformed. Not into a beauty by conventional standards. She still had the same angular face, the same pale complexion. But she moved with a confidence that made people step back. Her simple dress fit her better, her healthier frame filling it out properly. Her hair, pinned up neatly, caught the morning light with hints of gold they'd never noticed. Most striking were her eyes, no longer downcast. They met every gaze directly, holding a quiet strength that made the mockers of old look away first. "My lord," Mrs. Murphy whispered to Mrs. Stanley. "Is that really Clara Wade?" "Clara Boone," Amy Chen corrected firmly, standing nearby. "And yes, it is." The couple made their way through town, stopping at various booths, greeting people with calm civility. When they reached the medical tent where Dr. Garrett was offering consultations, he nearly dropped his stethoscope. "Mrs. Boone," he stammered, "I heard, that is, people say you've been practicing medicine in the mountains?" "Helping where I can," Clara replied modestly. "Mountain life doesn't allow for waiting for doctors when emergencies arise." "She saved 3 lives this winter," Elias added with quiet pride, "including mine." Word had already spread about Clara's medical skills. The trappers she'd operated on had sung her praises in every saloon from here to Cheyenne. The Cherokee family she'd helped had named their new daughter after her. Even the outlaws she'd poisoned, temporarily, had grudgingly admitted she'd shown more mercy than they deserved. At the church booth, Reverend Patterson approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Boone, I wonder if I might apologize for my conduct before your wedding. It was unchristian of me." Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, Reverend. We all have moments we're not proud of." The gracious response seemed to shame him more than anger would have. He retreated, and Clara noticed others watching, reassessing, recalibrating their memories of the ugly spinster they'd mocked. The real sensation came at the shooting contest. It was a Founders' Day tradition, men competing for prizes and bragging rights. When Clara approached the registration table, carrying her rifle, the crowd buzzed with disbelief. "Women don't enter the shooting contest," Judge Patterson said automatically. "Is there a rule against it?" Clara asked mildly. The judge consulted his papers, frowning. "Well, no, but then I'd like to enter. Unless you'd prefer to make a rule specifically to exclude me?" Trapped by his own legalism, the judge had no choice but to allow it. The crowd pressed close as Clara took her position. The target was set at 50 yards, challenging but not impossible. Her first shot hit dead center. So did her second, and her third. By the time she'd put 6 bullets through nearly the same hole, the crowd had gone from skeptical to amazed. She didn't win. Jake Morrison managed to edge her out by a hair's breadth, but she'd proven her point. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" someone called out. "My husband taught me," Clara said simply, "and I practiced." Amazing what a person can learn when they apply themselves. But the true revelation came at the social that evening. The town hall was decorated with bunting and flowers, couples dancing to the fiddle band. When Elias and Clara entered, conversation stuttered to a halt. They made a striking couple, he in his dark suit, she in a deep green dress that brought out the color in her eyes. But it wasn't their clothes that drew stares. It was the way they looked at each other, the obvious connection between them, the small touches and shared glances that spoke of deep intimacy. "Would you dance with me, Mrs. Boone?" Elias asked formally, though his eyes held warmth. "Always, Mr. Boone," she replied, taking his hand. They moved onto the floor, and it became clear that somewhere in their mountain home, they'd been practicing. They danced with the coordination of long partners, her hand resting trustingly on his shoulder, his arm protective around her waist. When he spun her, her face lit with genuine joy, and when he pulled her close, she looked at him like he hung the moon. "They're in love," Mrs. Chen said softly to her daughter. "Real love, not the showy kind." It was true, and everyone could see it. The way Elias's face softened when he looked at his wife. The way Clara unconsciously leaned toward him even when they weren't touching. The private smiles, the wordless communication, the easy affection of 2 people who'd found their match. When the music ended, others approached them, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The banker's wife complimented Clara's marksmanship. The blacksmith asked Elias about a new technique for tempering steel. Slowly, the couple was drawn into the community that had once rejected them. But the climactic moment came when Samuel Henderson, Clara's former beau, approached with his wife. Mrs. Henderson, pretty in the faded way of women who'd gotten everything too easily, looked Clara up and down with barely concealed envy. "Clara," Samuel said awkwardly, "you look, well." "Thank you, Samuel," Clara replied pleasantly. "Marriage agrees with me. I heard about your adventures. Quite remarkable for someone who was always so—" He trailed off, unable to find a polite way to say pathetic. "So overlooked," Clara suggested gently. "Yes, it's amazing what people are capable of when someone believes in them." Elias appeared at her elbow then, his presence a subtle reminder of who Clara belonged to now. Samuel retreated hastily, but not before Clara saw the regret in his eyes. He'd thrown away gold while chasing fool's brass, and now he knew it. As the evening progressed, the stories began to flow. The shopkeeper mentioned how Clara had saved the trapper. The minister's wife admitted she'd heard about the outlaws. Even Jake Morrison, after a few drinks, loudly proclaimed that Grizzly's wife was the best shot he'd seen in years, for a woman. By the time Elias and Clara prepared to leave, the transformation was complete, not just of Clara, but of the town's perception. The woman they'd mocked as the ugliest in the territory stood before them radiant with confidence and happiness. The marriage they'd laughed at as a desperate match between rejects had become something to envy. "You know they'll be talking about this for years," Clara said, as Elias helped her into the wagon. "Let them talk," he replied, echoing his words from their wedding day. "But I think the story will be different now." He was right. In the coming weeks and months, the tale spread throughout the territory. But it had changed. No longer was it the joke about the mountain man and the ugly spinster. Now it was a romance, a transformation, a story of two outsiders who'd found each other and created something beautiful. The story grew with each telling. Clara's rescue of Elias became more dramatic. Her confrontation with the outlaws gained epic proportions. Their love story accumulated the polish of legend. The beast who saw beauty where others saw plainness. The overlooked woman who bloomed under the light of real love. But in their mountain cabin, as summer gave way to autumn and autumn to winter, Elias and Clara lived the quieter truth. They worked side by side, building their life together. Clara's garden flourished, providing herbs for healing and vegetables for their table. Elias's hunting and trapping prospered, with Clara keeping the books and managing their increasing trades with town. On quiet evenings, they'd sit by the fire, Clara with her medical journals, Elias with his books on philosophy or agriculture. Sometimes they'd read aloud to each other. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from perfect understanding. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one snowy night, a year and a half after their wedding. "Marrying the ugly spinster?" Elias pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I married the strongest, smartest, bravest woman in the territory, who also happens to be beautiful, though she still doesn't quite believe it." "The town believes it now," Clara mused. "Funny how success changes people's vision." "The town sees what we always knew," Elias corrected, "that you were never what they said you were. You were just waiting for someone to see the truth. And you were waiting for someone to see past Grizzly to Elias," Clara added, understanding flowing both ways. As winter deepened, travelers would sometimes seek shelter with them, carrying tales back to civilization. They spoke of the mountain couple's hospitality, of Clara's healing skills and Elias's wisdom, of a partnership so seamless it seemed they'd been together decades rather than years. The legend grew, as legends do. In some versions, Clara had been beautiful all along, hiding her looks to test the hearts of men. In others, love itself had transformed her, like a fairy tale. The truth, that confidence and happiness and being seen truly could change how a person carried themselves, was somehow both simpler and more profound. Years later, when Cedar Ridge had grown into a proper town with sidewalks and a hospital, old-timers would still tell the story. They'd point to the mountain where the Boones lived, successful now with their trading post and Clara's healing practice, their children strong and wild and free. "See that mountain?" they'd say. "That's where Grizzly Boone took his bride." Everyone said she was the ugliest woman in the territory, but he saw different, saw what was inside, and when she stood up at their wedding, when she walked through town a year later, when she saved his life and fought off bandits and became the best healer this side of Denver, well, we all learned something about looking deeper. The young people would roll their eyes, thinking it another tall tale, but the old-timers knew better. They'd been there. They'd seen Clara Wade become Clara Boone, watched plain turn to striking, weakness to strength, mockery to legend. And in their cabin, as the years passed and their love deepened like wine aging in oak, Clara and Elias would sometimes laugh about it. The town that had mocked them now held them up as an example. The woman once called ugly was now remembered as beautiful. The man once feared as savage was now respected as wise. "They never did understand," Clara would say, her hair silver now, but her eyes still bright. "No," Elias would agree, pulling her close despite the creaking in his bones. "They saw the ending but missed the truth, which was that you were always beautiful. They just needed the right eyes to see it, and I was the lucky fool who had them." In the end, that was the real story. Not of transformation, but of recognition. Not of ugly becoming beautiful, but of beauty being revealed. Not of mockery turned to praise, but of two people who found in each other what the rest of the world had missed. And perhaps that's the greatest love story of all. To be seen, truly seen, and in that seeing, to finally see yourself. The legend of the mountain man and his bride lived on, told around campfires and in saloons, growing with each telling. But the truth was both simpler and more beautiful than any story. Two outsiders had found each other, chosen each other, and built a life that proved the mockers wrong in the best possible way, by being happily, defiantly, gloriously themselves. And if you listen close on a quiet mountain night, they say you can still hear it, the echo of laughter from a cabin where love made beauty out of what the world called plain, where courage grew from kindness, and where ugly became the most beautiful word of all, because it led to everything that came after. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel From Wild West for more tales of love, courage, and redemption from the American frontier. What did you think of Clara and Elias's journey? Share your thoughts with us.